Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today to learn more about the Night Cities Challenge. My name is Francesca Legasila-Covey, and I have the pleasure of serving as Knight Foundation's Vice President of the Community Impact Program. At Knight Foundation, we believe that the most powerful ideas come from people that are building solutions rooted in their lived experience. We invest in 26 communities across the United States where we show up to support people as they shape the places they call home, the places you call home. That commitment led us 10 years ago to launch the first Night Cities Challenge, where we put out an open call for ideas to strengthen local life, and we received more than 16,000 ideas from across our 26 communities. 99 of those became a reality. From public pools to pedestrian walkways, they were ideas that touched everyone's daily life and really created stronger communities in the 26 cities we call Night Cities. Earlier this year, we were really excited to announce the relaunch of the Night Cities Challenge. We are now accepting applications as part of the first cohort of the new challenge, a $5 million open call across our 26 communities. For those of you that are not as familiar with the 26 communities, you can go onto our website to find them under communities, but they will also be listed on this slide deck. So what are we asking you to do? We're inviting individuals and organizations with big, bold, creative ideas that will help their communities thrive, apply for this opportunity. I am sure that it describes many of you on this call. We're going to be looking for ideas that strengthen local information ecosystems, that expand economic opportunity, and grow cultural vibrancy. My colleague Kyla will walk through each of these investment areas in just a moment. Knight Foundation will invest up to $200,000 in selected projects, which must be completed within 1 year of the funding disbursement. Applications are now open and will be open until April 30th. Recipients will be selected by the end of August, and cohort participants will have the opportunities for peer networking and shared learning across communities. We want every person in a Night City with a great idea to see themselves in this challenge and to apply. You don't need a particular background or a particular title. You just need to understand what is not working in the place you call home and have the idea for how you can fix it. This challenge is for everyone. When our founders, Jack and Jim Knight, built their newspapers across the United States and across these 26 communities, they believed fundamentally that local communities were distinct places, each with their own cultures and goals. Those values have guided Knight Foundation for the past 75 years, and they're the heart of the Night Cities Challenge today. When people are trusted to imagine what's possible and supported to bring these ideas to life, we know amazing things can happen. We saw it already, and we see it every day. I am so excited that you're here with us today. We are so delighted that we're going to have the opportunity to hear from you and to understand what is working in your cities and what is not working, and the ideas that you have to make it better. I'd like to now hand it over to Kyla, Director of Information and Society at Knight Foundation.
Thank you, Chessie, and thank you everyone for joining us. We're really excited about the Night Cities Challenge, and I'm going to take the next few minutes to walk through a little bit more of the details of how are we thinking about the projects and proposals that we're looking for at Night Cities Challenge. At the highest level, Knight Foundations focus our investments in 3 focus areas that we feel are really core to thriving communities. Those 3 include strengthening the information ecosystem, expanding economic mobility, and growing cultural vibrancy. So I'm going to just take a moment and do a beat through each one and hopefully provide a little bit of clarity about how we're thinking through each of these focus areas for potential grant proposals. First, when it comes to strengthening the information ecosystem, here we're really thinking about projects that expand access to reliable information, advance sustainable models for local journalism, and help residents really better navigate civic news and information that impact their daily lives. The ultimate outcome that we think about when we're thinking about strengthening the information ecosystem is how we can advance and strengthen individual and resident agency, so that they can make better informed decisions for their lives. The second investment pathway, or second focus area, is really around expanding economic mobility. So projects here could support, for example, small businesses and entrepreneurs and unlock the potential of local industries that have economic benefits for residents. Here we're really thinking about how can we bolster local community resilience, helping individuals climb up the economic ladder and also have the resources to help shape and inform decision-making in their communities. Thirdly, when we talk about growing cultural vibrancy, we're talking about a few things. Of course, we're talking about advancing local arts and culture. We're talking about celebrating community and identity, and also about strengthening the local institutions and places that bring people together. Here, we're really thinking about how we grow belonging, how we grow connection, pride, how we're tying people to place, and really as a core component of building common ground when it comes to local communities. You can find more information about these focus areas at knightfoundation.org/how-we-fund, which gives a little bit more detail into each of these focus areas. Beyond the actual substance of the focus areas, as we're thinking about project proposals that come in through the Night Cities Challenge, there are a few areas that we're looking for when we're going to be reviewing projects. First and foremost, we're thinking a lot about community impact. And so projects that have a measurable or specific way that they are strengthening outcomes in communities across these focus areas is something that we are putting a high eye towards. We're also thinking a lot about viability, specifically wanting to make sure that projects have a clearly articulated, reasonable plan and can be achievable within a 12-month period. We're hoping projects are collaborative, particularly when it comes to engaging with community members and local organization in the decision-making process and how this could help shape outcomes. And then the two more pieces that we're thinking about are how are these projects innovative? And when we say innovative, we're really thinking about introducing concepts, projects, experiments that are new to a specific community or adapted for a new purpose in a creative way. And projects that have really high learning potential, meaning from doing this project, there is something that could be learned that can either be built on or expanded over time. And so with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Marissa, who is the director of our journalism team here at Knight Foundation, who will walk through the budget template that will be required for the proposals.
Thank you so much, Kyla, and hello, everyone. While the Night Cities Challenge is open to anyone with a community-changing idea, a strong application includes a thorough budget to help us understand how you plan to bring this idea to life. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through how to fill out the required budget template. There we go. Perfect. And so when you open up the spreadsheet, the first page offers best practices for filling out the budget. I do encourage you to read through these before moving on to the year one tab, but I'll let you review all of these on your own. I do want to mention that this template is available both to view and download at kf.org/KCC, as well as within the application in Submittable. You'll need to download the file before editing. It's also important to point out before I move into the year one tab that you'll be filling out a proposed budget specifically for the project that you'd like Knight to fund. This is not your organization's total budget, okay? So moving on here to the year one tab, I'll just kind of walk you through it step by step. You'll put your organization name on the top. If you're an individual who is applying for a Night Cities Challenge grant, then you would just put your name here. Don't worry about grant number or reporting period for now. Those are things that we can worry about later. And you'll see here just at a high level, there are two different components of this spreadsheet. The first is Knight Foundation funds only. The second is all non-Knight funds. Again, this is specific to the project that you are requesting funding for. And so I'm going to start just by walking through the Knight Foundation funds side. And you can see here that there's a grayed out box under the proposed column. And for the purposes of filling out this sheet and what you'll submit to us as part of your application is everything just in the proposed columns that you see here. So don't worry about actuals. So let's pretend for a moment that I am requesting $150,000 from Knight. I put that here in the foundation Knight funds only side in the grayed box. And when I scroll down, you can see that that lists the total revenues on the Knight Foundation side as $150,000. Okay. So next we're going to walk into the project expenses. And you can see here there are different categories. I'll walk you through those pretty quickly here. But you'll note that in each one, it says to specify. So as an example here, let's say that for program salaries, the executive director of the organization is going to be working specifically on this project at 10% time. So you see I've written, I don't need to write the person's name, just the job title, the percentage of time, and then in the proposed budget, let's say it's $15,000. I do want to be clear, I'm making all of these numbers up for the purposes of helping you understand how to work through the spreadsheet. So please don't take it as guidance on what the number should be. It's really about what does your project need and making sure you make those frames from there. So then let's say also for this project, there's going to be a project manager at 15% time. And that amount is $10,000. And then I'm going to continue working my way through. I saw that there was a question in the chat about consultants. There are not restrictions on the use of consultants. We do, again, ask you to specify the consultant. So if in this grant proposal that I'm doing, I need a consultant for landscape work, then I would specify the type of consulting that I need. And again, I would put the dollar amount. Again, just making up numbers here for the purposes of helping you understand it. And then let's say also for this proposal, I'm going to need $15,000 in travel to bring the project to life. And you can see each of these categories here. One thing I do want to flag is that if you're asking for Knight support for benefits, that is separate from salaries and wages. So you would just combine that into this row here. Knight generally does not support just overhead or indirect expenses as a whole. This may be different from what you've seen in some other places where you can designate a percentage of budget just to overhead as a broad category. If you are looking for overhead support, again, you will need to specify the type of support that you need and putting it here. And then for things that don't fit neatly into any of these other columns, you see we have an other section. So like as an example, if I said, oh, you know what, I need funding for marketing materials, and that's $10,000, then you will see here that I filled that in. One thing that I want to note, and that's really, really important when we're going to be looking at these after submission, is that you will see that the total revenue on the Knight side matches the total expenses on the Knight side. And you can see that it's helpful, it codes green when it matches. If I were to delete the marketing materials as an example, you can see that that number has changed and there's the differential. It's red to show you that it doesn't match. So once it matches, then for those, this may not be relevant to everyone who is applying, but if you are also bringing non-Knight funds to bring the project to life. So as an example, if in this particular example that I've been walking you through, you're asking for $150,000 in Knight funds, but you're also planning to bring $150,000 in non-Knight funds for a total project budget of $300,000, that's when you would fill out this non-Knight fund section, and you would do it exactly the same way that you did the Knight Foundation fund side. You would specify in each of these categories, you know, are you bringing in individual contributions at what amount, foundation grants from other foundations, federal support, etc. Again, if you're bringing it in from other categories, just please specify what that category is. And then just as you did over here, you'll see a total. And then just as we did, as I walked through this example on the Knight Foundation side, you would do the same thing for the non-Knight fund side. The total revenues for non-Knight funds should match at the end of it the total expenses. And so just make sure that when you are submitting this, that you are paying attention to that component to make sure that for both categories, the total revenues equal the total expenses. One other thing that I just want to note here is you'll see that there's only a year one tab. That is because the proposed project or phase of work of the project is expected, as Kyla mentioned, to be completed within 1 year. So everything that is encompassing the project that you're requesting funds for should be encompassed within this particular tab. You should not have to copy or add further tabs here. All right. And then Justin, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of those key tips. Just want to reiterate again a couple of these best practices before we move on. I know it sounds like I'm saying this a lot, but it is really important that the project revenues equal the project expenses when you are looking at. They must balance and they must equal the total amount requested for support. Again, specificity is always helpful. So when you're looking at salary allocations, for job titles, for percentage of time, etc. And then finally, again, that Knight Foundation does not pay indirect administrative fees, except when necessary service directly related to the project. Those are determined on a case-by-case basis. So with that, I'd like to invite a few of my colleagues to join me in answering questions that you have submitted in the Q&A function on your screen. If you haven't had a chance to do so yet, we welcome your questions. And we will dive in. And please, just one note, please don't submit questions specific only to your own proposal. This is really time meant for sort of higher level questions. Thank you and welcome everybody.
Thanks, Marissa. I can kick things off with a few questions that have been coming through, and thank you folks for submitting questions. We want to make sure this time is valuable to you. We're getting several questions around geography and whether or not, for example, projects have to be based in one of the 26 Knight cities, if it's okay for the person submitting the proposal to live outside of Knight City, etc. For us and for what we're focusing on when it comes to the Knight Cities Challenge is that we really want to make sure that the impact of the project is meant to be felt within at least one of the 26 Knight cities and the residents that live there, even if it's a subset of the residents, etc. What's really important is that the impact of the project is within a Knight city. A second question that I'm getting around the focus areas, and then a few of my colleagues will answer a few more. One is around whether it's okay, or a theme that's arising is whether it's okay for a project to, touch multiple focus areas. And to us, this makes a lot of sense. And the answer is yes. What you will see, though, in the application is that you will be asked to select the primary focus area for which the project is driving outcomes towards. And so, yes, it's absolutely possible, and in many cases, common for multiple focus areas to be part of a project, but we'll be asking you to select a primary. And the final clarifying question, at least for now, that I'm seeing around the focus areas is whether public space or green infrastructure counts as or is considered growing cultural vibrancy. And the answer is yes. These are places that are bringing people together. And so a quick answer about that specific question.
Great, thank you, Kyla. So another question we received was mentioning sharing learnings across communities. Do we want projects that will share learning with other local communities or national communities? The answer to that is that as part of the first cohort, recipients will gather to learn from each other's projects. It's not a requirement of the application, but if you do see opportunities to share learnings, we're definitely interested in hearing about that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here discussing this exciting challenge to surface the best ideas to shape thriving communities. For the next question, we wanted to give a little bit more details on the economic mobility focus area. So we got a few questions just asking for examples and kind of unpacking what that means. So to add on to the background that Kyla provided on economic mobility, there's really three pillars underpinning this area. One is solutions that fuel locally grown entrepreneurship and small business development. So think of anything that is supporting small businesses to deal with particular challenges that they're facing in their community, whether it's like access to capital, access to particular information that's relevant for their industry, like upskilling around AI and integrating that into their organizations. The other industries bring to the communities. So this could be around talent pipeline development. There's a lot of dynamism in how jobs are being adapted to meet this moment. And there's a lot of programming that is out there to make sure that people in the community get placed to the jobs that are being created. So anything around creating new pathways to those jobs and enhancing the collaboration across the region as well is another area under this bucket. Because as our communities grow, there's more complexity and need to connect the dots around the key stakeholders. And something that connects the dots and then makes it easier for people to get access to good jobs could be another example under that category. And the third pillar under economic mobility is accelerating the economic opportunities that result from local climate solutions. So we have seen in the economies across some of our communities that they are facing challenges because of climate change, and that is resulting in risks to the economic viability of individuals, organizations, and the community overall. So interesting and novel solutions that are at the intersection of climate and economic mobility is another focus area. But I just want to underscore that when we think about economic mobility, workforce development, small business support, a lot of things have been tried, and we're really looking for things that are novel and bringing a creative approach to making sure that everyone has economic resilience.
I'll jump in here. Hi, everybody. I'm Patton. There have been several questions about the timeline for this process. Our recipients will be selected and announced in August. And the project does have to be completed within 12 months of when the funds have been dispersed, and we anticipate dispersing those funds in the fall of 2026. We will be in communication, obviously, with those who are the recipients at the moment they are being notified of what our expected payout schedule will be.
We also have a few questions around whether proposed projects have to be totally new or if the projects can already exist or be relatively new. We understand that there are many projects that might be already underway. I think what's important is that the components for which the proposal is requesting funds for is new and or additive to the project in some way, and that project is a new and innovative way to be solving problems or addressing specific areas within the community. Another one about the budget that is coming through is some clarity around in-kind funding, and additionally whether project budgets could be more than 200,000, and the answer is yes. Knight Foundation can fund up to $200,000 of a project, but other funders or other kinds of in-kind donations, whether it's gifted rent, gifted, office space, etc. The whole budget of the project can be more than 200,000, but the portion for which Knight Foundation would grant is up to $200,000.
There's also a question in here about fiscal sponsorship and regranting. So can Knight Foundation grants be used for regranting? My organization funds community impact for arts organizations. Yes, the answer is that if you choose to redisperse the funds, we just ask you to clarify that and what the impact of that work would be in your application. And then also, just to follow on as an additional question, can two organizations partner on a single project? The answer is yes, but only one organization can submit the application, and we would consider them to be the primary organization. If you are partnering with someone who is local to the city, we encourage them to be the primary applicant, as they are the deeply grounded worker in the community.
I saw a few questions come in on to clarify the role of trust in government and civic institutions in terms of a focus area and how the community impact program looks at the engagement with government. So we believe that the way individuals and organizations interact with their government is key for having agency to shape their communities. So making it easier for individuals to get the latest information on what's happening to their government, and also to have the tools to advocate for change are really important pillars within the community and kind of span across the information ecosystem area as well as economic mobility, depending on what exactly you're advocating to your government. So that's more of a horizontal across the focus areas, but definitely tied to the way we do work with community impact.
I see a question on whether the first focus area on information ecosystems would be solely about news and journalism, or would it also consider broader information ecosystems? So it is absolutely not meant to solely be about news and journalism, although that certainly is encompassed within the focus area. But other types of information access and ways to strengthen access to news and broader information are absolutely included. So that could be anything from civic information, it could be libraries, it could be research. It is meant to be more broad than just news and journalism, and we are open to hearing what you are thinking about and what you think your community needs.
We have a few questions around whether or not recipients have to be a nonprofit or a 501c3 specifically, and the answer is no. The grants can go to nonprofit organizations, for-profit organizations, not just C3s, and you'll see that in the grant application, you'll have an opportunity to specify the type of organization for which you are applying from.
Bear with us as we look through all the questions.
So there's a few questions in these two areas. So we saw a few individuals ask if the projects have to be completely new. So to the Kyla's point earlier, we're looking for new activities, but it's not the initiative or the organization itself doesn't have to be net new. So the particular activities that you're funding through this challenge is what we will be evaluating as new or novel. And another bucket of questions that I've seen a few come in on is around capital expenses and whether those are permissible under the budget. So as long as you outline what activities they relate to, that is something that can be included in the budget.
There's a question also about the scale of a project. So if something's spanning the entirety of a state, but that might affect two night communities, and would they be eligible? If the project itself serves our night communities and the folks within it, then yes, it is eligible. And we encourage projects that serve multiple communities if they are able to do so, but it is not a requirement.
Another question that we received is whether Knight Foundation only will commit to funding a certain percentage of a full project budget. Do they need to see other project funders in order to commit to funding, or could we request funding for the full project budget? So it is really up to the individual applicant. You can request that Knight cover the full amount, again, up to $200,000. Or it could be up to $200,000 as part of a project that is larger than that amount. So as you saw when I walked through the budget example, if the total project budget was $300,000, then you could seek up to $200,000 of that to be covered by Knight, depending on your other funding sources. So it is, you can have a request in which Knight would be the sole funder.
Thank you, Marissa. For the next question, we want to cover the topic of national work versus place-based work. So we have a few questions around activities that will be happening at a national level that could happen at a city at some point in time. And we just want to clarify that for Knight Foundation and for this challenge in particular, it's really important that you work hand in hand with partners within the Knight communities. So even if the scope of your activity and your initiative is intended to be national in the long term, it's important that you identify a partner that at the local level that will be working with you to develop the initiative and drive the activities that will be funded with this challenge grant.
Somewhat similar to the scale and timing questions around whether or not it's okay for projects to span multiple years, but a portion of the work would be completed within the 12-month period. I think the answer is yes. What's really important is that the activities and the project and the proposal for Knight Cities Challenge happens within a 12-month period, and that there's a specific sort of outcome or community impact from those activities specific to Knight communities. And one more clarifying piece, I know I just talked about whether nonprofits, for-profits, 501c3s are eligible. I also wanted to be clear that individuals are also eligible to apply. So you will also see that as an option for if you are applying as an individual to the Knight Cities Challenge.
I see a question here on whether we have any details about the review process. For example, a peer review process versus a panel of judges, and how that evaluation will follow a rubric style or more free-form conversation. So what you can expect through the review process is that it will be based on a rubric, and that we will frame out that review process with human review. It will not at this time be involving a free-form conversation. So making sure that the information that you are submitting through the submittable application process really encompasses the heart and the breadth of the work that you're going to be doing.
I see a question about the best pathway for an applicant to get early feedback on a project that's already in development, but still flexible on a roadmap. Some directions that they took could be benefited a lot from program input early on. I think most folks here are aware that there are office hours for many of us on staff here. They're 10-minute windows. We are not going to be able to assess or green light your projects, but we are there to help answer specific questions relative to your individual projects. So we encourage you to sign up for our office hours.
So I'll read this question out loud before answering. So someone asked, if approved, can we reapply for a future grant to continue the success of the project next year? I know it is only a one-year grant. Definitely yes. So part of this work is learning about what are the most effective solutions to the challenges that we want to solve in our communities. So if a grant is successful in achieving its outcomes, it's still within the realm of possibility that additional funding to scale could be received, but that is not, there are no promises with this particular first phase. So you'll be evaluated based on accomplishing the outcomes. And then moving forward, we can have further discussions on follow-on funding. Yeah, just to cover that one.
We received a question about from individuals or organizations that might have more than one project idea or ongoing project that fits into one or multiple of the focus areas. We're requesting that each applicant applies once. It is possible for maybe you and your project are applying for Night Cities Challenge and maybe a partner on another Night Cities Challenge application. But when it comes to being the primary applicant, we're requesting that each applicant applies once.
We also received questions about Shining Star projects. What do they get right about showing long-term impact in a one-year frame? And relatedly, a question on, are these meant to be one-time projects as opposed to starting a program that would continue into the future? So they can be one-time projects, or they can be the start of something that continues into the future. Either is perfectly acceptable as part of the application process. In terms of sort of Shining Star projects, we are, and sort of the core piece of the work, and you've heard some of this mentioned already, is really thinking about impacting community and specifically within our night communities. So what that impact will look like, and the better that you can in your application articulate what that impact would be making it the strongest application possible. So the better that you can be specific about what kind of impact you would see as the result of the night funding would help.
There are also questions about expansion activities for projects. So things that an organization or an entity may be doing already in their activities and how that could be deepened. You are welcome to apply with that. And with that as your focus, we would say that we would look for what the impact of that work would be within the specific community. I'm also seeing a question in here about a formal multi-organizational partnership as a requirement for eligibility. It is not. However, if you are not situated within a night city, we are requesting that you have a partnership that is deeply aligned with the work that you intend to do.
Thank you. And we have a question about civic technology and whether it's in scope. So I'll read it out loud for everyone's benefit and then go ahead and answer it. Does Knight Foundation consider civic technology platforms that help cities improve transparency and economic outcomes for residents? And if so, how should applicants frame that under your focus areas? So this goes back to the piece on increasing trust in government and how that's part of the information ecosystem and economic mobility pillars, more or less. It's definitely within scope because we believe that individuals having agency to shape their communities is key. And if they have access to tools that could help them engage with their government more effectively, that fits within that umbrella. And we are actively thinking about enhancing the way individuals receive information in their communities. So that will be included. And on the economic outcomes piece, depending on what exactly the platform does, who the audience is, and what the outcomes are, would depend on the framing, whether it's more so on the economic mobility piece or on the information ecosystem piece.
Thanks, Jen. We have a few questions about details around the rubric or how projects will be assessed. And you can see if you go to the KCC or Night Cities Challenge webpage, in our FAQs, there will be further details of the areas that we discussed in this webinar, including community impact, viability, how we're thinking about collaboration, et cetera, which are in line with the rubric that will be used to assess the projects.
A question here on whether the benefits to community have to be realized by the end of the 12-month period. No, the full benefits don't have to be realized by the end of the 12-month period, but we do expect as part of the process that there would be measurable progress and measurable impact in that 12-month period. So it doesn't have to be fully realized, but we do expect that in that year-long period, there would be impact.
There's a question about giving examples for cultural vibrancy, just as we did for the economic mobility focus. And so I would say from an arts perspective, the way that we're envisioning this is something that is uplifting stories, leaders within your community, things that tell stories in past that maybe have not been told before, things that bring people together. We know that the arts are not simply a painting on a wall, that is often a convening factor. It is a way to bring people together. So thinking of it more holistically, if a performance is gathering folks, if it's something that's inviting people from the community to be participatory, those are ways when we think about cultural vibrancy.
Thank you, Patton. And we got a question, can the project be focused on a community that speaks a different language other than English in a night community? Yes, can. We have supported projects across the country that are targeted towards specific individuals and sections of the community because they are part of the community and should be represented in the solutions as well. So that is no issue.
We did want to let people know there have been a couple questions on this. Office hours as of right now are fully booked. We are going to look at whether we can open up some additional availability there, but do want to just let those of you who are curious know that at the moment they are fully booked.
I think we have time for just a handful more questions before we wrap up. A question around whether a project can include the development of land or space, and the answer is yes. And that we just ask that it's clear in the project and in the budget around what the funds would be going to, but that type of project can absolutely apply for Night Cities Challenge.
I saw a few questions about submitting multiple projects to target them towards specific focus areas. So each organization can only be funded once. So please submit your best application only one time. There's an opportunity to partner with a specific community at the local level. To the example that we mentioned earlier, if your work is more national in scope and you're looking to bring that impact to a specific community. But other than that, please submit only one application.
Thank you everyone so much for taking the time to join the webinar to learn more about the Night Cities Challenge. We are incredibly excited for this work. This marks the conclusion of the webinar, but a recording can be found and will be uploaded to the Night Cities Challenge website. Additionally, if you have further questions, you can feel free to email kcc@kf.org with your questions. And the webinar, again, along with our FAQs, more information about the budget, the application, etc., can be found on the KCC website, which is kf.org/KCC. Thank you again, everyone, for your time and excitement.